Available. So again, welcome to everyone. We are going to be covering attendance by percentage reports today, talking about various different considerations on those reports. We'll go through the reports that are available in the program, talk about how you can customize them, and the considerations that you want to pay attention to. As I mentioned to most of you already, I do have everyone on mute to start off with, just because fire departments can be a somewhat noisy place for whatever reason. But feel free to unmute yourself. And if you do have any questions at all, please just pop notes into the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that so that we can see it. All right, so we're going to be starting off talking about attendance by percentage training reports today. So broadly speaking, when we're dealing with attendance by percentage reports or percentage attendance reports, there's a couple different scenarios that you might find yourself in. For some departments that are on the smaller side that have just a single station, these reports can be fairly straightforward to use a lot of the time. So in that scenario, most of the time you can just run the reports straight without having to think too much about things like assistance reports and the stations that sessions are attached into. But one of the things that we really need to pay attention to and always think about when we're running attendance by percentage reports is the apples to apples or apples to oranges comparison. Because any one of these reports that we run, we need to provide the software with two different pieces of information. We need to say, which personnel are we running this report for? And we need to say, what actual events, training records, incidents, do I want to factor into that person's attendance? So thinking about those two different things is going to be sort of the meat and potatoes about what we talk about today. If you're in a single station environment, then usually the question of who am I running this report for is pretty simple. A lot of the time that's going to be all the members of my department. Bearing in mind, though, that in some cases you may not want to include, say, senior staff, auxiliaries, recruits, other members of the department in that primary group that you're considering. So in that scenario, often what I will do is I will use the function in the personnel records called group. And for those of you who were around for some of our training organization videos or discussions, you might recognize this personnel group option. But personnel group, if we look on an individual personnel record, personnel group is found under the employment tab of the personnel record. And the group function is used to create arbitrary groups of members of the fire department that I can assign people to and then quickly pull up all the members of that group. So if we use this as an example, I could say if I have something like a firefighter group set up for my department, I can assign people to that group, and that doesn't necessarily line up with rank. It can mean just a general role or overall group. And once I have assigned people to that group, in the personnel list window, I can use the group search to say, show me everybody who belongs to that group. And that can be a really effective way of taking a larger chunk of the department and breaking it down into a specific set of people that you want to look at, especially in the context of a report like this, where you might not necessarily always want to run it for every person. Pretty much all the attendance by percentage reports in the program are run out of the personnel list window. And doing searching on the personnel list window is always going to be the first step in any of those reports. Identifying that first piece of information, which members of the department do I want to include in this report? So if you are in a relatively straightforward single station environment, then just using a group function can be a very effective way of breaking the larger group of the department down. We'll talk about how that works in the context of multi-station environments in a second, but the basic principle is still exactly the same. So when I look at the various different attendance by percentage reports, there's pretty much 3 attendance by percentage reports that I can run out of the program. There's the training attendance by percentage report, there's the incident attendance by percentage report, and there's the generic attendance by percentage report. So these are again all found in the personnel module. So once again, those reports accessed through the printer button on the right of the personnel list window are the training attendance by percentage, the incident attendance by percentage, and the generic attendance by percentage. And the reason we have a separate training and incident attendance by percentage reports is that those reports have much more detailed search options that allow us to answer the second part of the question of attendance by percentage reports, which is what sessions are we including in this particular report. So we're going to look at the sort of the additional search parameters that are available on those reports. Because of the way that attendance by percentage reports work, it can be a pretty good idea to try to determine for yourself using reports in other FirePro modules what you expect the baseline to be. Because when we're running an attendance by percentage report, we're trying to figure out what percentage of the whatever number of calls or whatever number of training sessions did these people attend. The reports that are built in the personnel module will do that searching for you and give you the results automatically. But I personally find that it can be nice to have a baseline of what I expect 100% attendance to be before I go into those reports, just so I can cross-check and have some knowledge of what I'm working with. So in this case, in this example, what we're going to be doing right now is running a report for the previous year. For me, I would often start this process by going into the relevant module, like I'm going to run attendance by percentage for incidents for last year, go into the incident report module, do a search for last year. I can see in this case, if I look in the top left-hand corner, I have 421 incidents. Now, when I look at a larger set of incidents like this, this represents every single call that the department has gone to in the last year. But from the percentage of incident attendance, I may not want to factor in every single one of these incidents into 100% attendance. Right? So one of the things I might do is say, okay, I've decided in advance or as part of our department policy that we exclude certain types of responses from the incident attendance by percentage reports. So in this case, I'm going to go into response type tab on my search functions. I'm going to select chosen response types, and this lets me build a specific set of response types that I might want to factor in. So I'm just going to grab the ones I want. I'm going to hold down the control key or the shift key and just drag them over to the right-hand side so that I can select them as part of these are the ones that I am factoring in to my search. I am not going to do any public service medical assists in there. I'm not going to do any alarm no fires or false alarms. I am just going to include a specific response set in there. So once I have selected all those, I can close this window, hit the magnifying glass on my list again, and get an updated list of 137 incidents that I do want to factor in to my system. I might also then add other search parameters. For example, I could say I only want to look at calls that are within my specific response location because I don't want to factor in mutual aid. I may want to look at other things like, are there specific pieces of information that I also want to factor in. But broadly speaking, we'll say that this is the 137 that I want to consider my base on here. So what I'm going to do on here is I'm going to save this as a saved search, and I'm going to say respondable incidents. The reason I'm doing this is that in the future, I may want to quickly run this report, and I don't want to have to rebuild it every single time I do it. So for reports that have fairly complicated or arbitrary guidelines, it's a nice thing to do to save the search parameters for yourself to make it a little bit easier. So we're going to say 137 is my base, 100% attendance. That's what I want to work with here. So what I'm going to do now is I have in my personnel list window the set of people that I want to include in here. We're going to talk today about some other factors like person taking time off that you might want to factor into this report, but we're going to assume just for the moment that that's not the case here. So I'm going to go into my printed reports. I'm going to go to my incident reports option and select incident attendance by percentage. So what pops up for me automatically here is a search parameter that is very similar to the one that I just saw in my previous incident report window when I was looking at it. It's the same report functions, search functions. So I'm going to replicate the ones that I used. This particular report parameter window also has the ability to save searches. So this again can be really handy when I am setting this up to use on a regular annual or basis like that. So I'm going to say last year, and I'm going to again go into my specific response type or chosen response types, build that list. Yeah, I will talk about assistance reports in a second. That tends to be the slightly more complicated version of this. So again, I've got my selected response types in here already. And if I want to quickly preview how many results that's going to give me, I hit calculate, and once again, I get 137 on here. If we were dealing with departments that had multiple stations and assist reports, then we might look at some of these other parameters, but right now, this kind of gives us the same information. So what I'm going to do, again, is I'm going to save this and say respondable incidents or whatever I want to call it. Once I save this search, what I can do in the future is if I come back and run this report again, I now have the option of quickly pulling up that pre-built search on there, which makes my life quite a bit faster when I factor in a lot of different things. So using this calculate button on this particular report parameter is going to give you what we would call base 100% amount. So this is saying 100% attendance is going to be based on, in this case, the 137 incidents that I kind of looked at and identified that I wanted to do before. There's also a little tick box here called sort by percentage. What this will do is take the results of your search and organize people based on what percentage of the calls they attended, as opposed to just by name as the report would arbitrarily. This option can be really handy if you have an attendance floor that you want to keep people above. So in that scenario, we could say 40% attendance is what I'm shooting at. So let's sort that out. So at this point, I'm ready to generate my report. So I'm going to use the printer button to pull it out. So, and again, as we go back to our basic requirements about what we want to tell the software, I have set which personnel records I want to include in this, and then told it what incidents do I want to factor in as 100% attendance on here. So in this case, I'm going to hit the print report button, send it to my screen, and what I will see is my personnel that I selected in the personnel window organized based on their overall attendance percentage, and then we're going to give you two pieces of information on this particular report. We're going to give you how many sessions this person attended and what percentage of the overall number of sessions that was. And we're also going to show you what percentage of the time they were on scene for. So when we look at an incident report, we can designate whether a person is on scene or not. And usually this is used to identify that they responded to the station, but didn't end up responding out to the call. So in this case, we can see that, as usual, there's a difference between the overall attendance percentages and the on-scene attendance percentages. And departments find this useful sometimes, just in the sense that there might be some people who have a large gap between the number of station calls they responded to versus the number of times they were actually on scene, which might, from an administration perspective, lead to a discussion about, hey, how can we get this time up, or they just physically live a long way from the station. Lots of things to factor in there, but this allows you to really easily say, okay, here's the floor, and we need to talk to everybody who's less than 40% in this example. So this is what we would consider a fairly straightforward example of the incident attendance by percentage. The training report works essentially the same way. Although with training, things tend to be a little more straightforward, in the sense that you get to arbitrarily set up, when you're configuring FirePro, what types of training sessions you have. So often in a case like this, I'll be saying something like, show me everything from last year. I would like to see only training sessions. And that shows me that there were 39 training sessions, for example. So the ability to just quickly filter down training usually makes this quite a bit easier. However, similarly, in the personnel list window, if I want to run that training report specifically, I can hit the printer button here, go into my training attendance by percentage report, and then once again, because the training parameters tend to be a little simpler, we haven't added a custom saved search function here, but it is certainly possible if you want one. But in this case, I can say really quickly, last year, calculate out 39, sort by percentage, and I can quickly spit out a preview of who was at these different sessions and how many of those there were. Again, because the training module has a tendency to include a lot of activities which are related to pay structures, it's often going to be useful to filter down to a specific type to do that. Another way of quickly taking a large group of meetings and training records and cutting them down to a manageable size, so you know which training sessions were considered mandatory, is to use one of our custom checkbox functions. So if we go into the setup menu under custom settings, in the meetings and training module, there's a tab called custom fields. This gives us the ability to customize a bunch of different fields on the meetings and training records. And that can include things like the types of activities, but we also have several custom checkboxes. And custom checkbox 1 is actually quite important in the context of this report, because this is actually one that's specifically hardwired to flow into a number of attendance by percentage reports and standard searches. So what I often do here is set this custom checkbox 1 title to mandatory. So this gives me an arbitrary place where I can say, this was a mandatory session that everybody was supposed to show up at. Once I've populated that custom checkbox, if I look on an individual training record, say one here, I see a mandatory checkbox right on the main tab of the training record. So I can flag this as a mandatory session. That means this one, everybody was supposed to go to. I want them to have been there. So the first thing that this does is, in the general meetings and training search, it gives you a search box option for mandatory, where I can say, show me only the ones where mandatory was checked. And it will give me an arbitrary set of incidents where that was checked. So this arbitrary mandatory checkbox can be used in the context of that meeting and training attendance by percentage report. So, if you're in a situation where you have quite a few different types of training activities, weekend trainings, training that happens, outside the hall that you're documenting, say, for pay purposes, but you only have a subset of those, which are ones that you definitely want people to be showing up for, you can use that mandatory tick box to take that big set and break it down into a smaller chunk. So again, when I'm running my search, I can say, give me my firefighter group, give me a training attendance by percentage report. I can pick my particular search time period and say, show me only the mandatory ones. How many was that? In this case, not very many. I'll do a longer date period. All right. How many mandatory did we have? And this can combine with the type search to give you a very specific set of sessions. And again, you can push that report out with, show me which one of the mandatory training sessions each individual person showed up for. So there is also in this window a report which is called the attendance by percentage report. This is a relatively generic report for attendance by percentage. And in some cases, it can be a bit of a, what we might think of as a blunter tool, but we'll walk through this particular report. And then once we've done that, we'll have a discussion about assistance reports and how those factor in a multi-station environment. So attendance by percentage is going to bring you up a search parameter that's a little bit different from what you see in the other attendance by percentage reports. So it's going to include our station here. So in this case, I could say last year, and what it's going to ask you by default is, what station should the reports that we factor in be attached to? We'll talk about this again in the multi-station environment, how this might function, but one of the options in here is to do calculate by station. So calculate by station means that it will look at what station the personnel are attached to, and it will only factor in the activities that are also assigned to that station. We're making some assumptions on that basic question of what do we want to factor in to this report. I can do things like subtotal it by month. I can do a new page for each personnel, and I can use this training mandatory only. So this training mandatory only option is specifically tied to that custom checkbox one from the training module that we looked at, where you can say, on this report, I only want to factor in mandatory training. I'm not going to do that here because there's not many of those. So I'm going to say, show me this report for last year. So once I go in here and select how the report goes in, the software is also going to prompt me if I want to manually adjust the base 100% values. We're going to talk about reasons you might have to adjust base 100% values. But if I hit yes, what it'll do is show me, in this case, for this one station, what the software considers base 100% attendance. And this particular report will automatically break out the various different training types that you've set up, incidents, and if you have them, the public education module. And so we can see it's saying this is what 100% attendance looks like for those types of activities. So if I hit OK here, I get a breakdown for each person on exactly what activities, what percentage of each activities they attended. One of the things that we probably notice right away is that this report has less in the way of search parameters and customization available when we're determining what 100% attendance is. So that's an important factor that we want to pay attention to. It does spit out more information at once, but it's a slightly broader look at that. Now, for many departments, they are not operating in a single station environment. And when we have multiple stations responding to calls, this does complicate the attendance by percentage report a fair bit. So the reports like the attendance by percentage report are actually a major reason that FirePro uses assistance reports in the program at all. Because it considerably simplifies the question of what were members of the department supposed to respond to. For example, if I look at in the incidents module, I can say, show me all the calls that our department did last year. and my result is 630 calls. That does factor in a bunch of assistance reports, which is something that we are actually interested in the context of the attendance by percentage report. So if I really want to, I can always go in to the details tab and filter out assistance reports to give me what I would consider true numbers. This tends to be something I do more when I'm doing statistical reports like total call numbers and things, but a lot of FirePro reports kind of factor assistance reports out to begin with. But in the case of a attendance by percentage report, what I fundamentally need to do is be breaking the totals that I'm getting up by station, because we are always looking at two types of information: which firefighters and which records do we want to include on there. So what the assist reports do is, if we look at this incident, for example, we have an incident that Station 3 responded to and that Station 6 also responded to assist as part of a multi-station response. From an attendance by percentage report perspective, we want Station 6 to get credit for showing up to this call. But if all the personnel were assigned to this incident that's just attached to Station 3, then we wouldn't really have any record that Station 6 responded. So the assist report provides that record. So what this lets me do is I can then, on this incidents list window, start to filter based on location by station specifically. So if I say I want to start by getting my totals for Station 1, when I include assistance reports, I see that Station 1 responded 75 times. This is my with the inclusion of my assistance reports, this is what I use as my base 100% attendance for Station 1. Right? There were 75 calls. And I could also add some filters like I did before. I could say, give me these chosen response types, and these are the ones that I want to include on here. I don't want fire investigations at all. So I can really structure exactly what I want on here, just like I could in the other scenario, but we're always adding the factor of station to this because we pretty much always want to run attendance by percentage reports one station at a time when you're doing a multi-station response. So in this case, I can say, all right, 52 calls for Station 1 is going to be my baseline. So my first step in the attendance by percentage report, as usual, is in my personnel list window. I search for all the personnel that I want to include on this report. So in this case, I'm going to search for Station 1. I could then also factor in one of my personnel groups if I wanted to. So I could do something like, say, firefighters from Station 1, and that would give me potentially a smaller list of just the people that I'm interested in looking at this report for. But in this case, we'll say just Station 1. So I'm going to go to the printer function here, go to my incident attendance by percentage report. And now to figure out 100% attendance for Station 1, I once again need to factor in my date period, my location, only calls that were assigned to Station 1. And we do definitely want to include assistance reports because those are ones that the station responded to. So we want to give the people credit for that. Include my assistance reports. Normally I don't include exposures, but this report doesn't include those by default most of the time. So in this case, I can say, give me a calculation, and I get my 75 again. If I wanted to, I could filter out for specific response types again, but I'll just run this report so we can see it. So the idea here is that it is going to show me for the specific station how many stations that incident had when we factor in their assistance reports, and how many sessions of those each individual person responded to in the same kind of way. Usually the attendance by percentage structure for training tends to be a bit simpler, but there are some factors that we also want to consider in a multi-station environment. Because again, when we're dealing with multi-station, sometimes there are particular, say, weekend training sessions, which might be assigned to a variety of different, like have members from a variety of different stations attending that you want to factor in as part of your 100% attendance. That also tends to be where this department has that set as weekend training, but the mandatory checkbox can come in quite handy there as far as saying this was a mandatory training session that we wanted to include. Another option for things that you can do here is, say you have a group of departments or stations within your department that all function as a single unit for training activities. If you have something like that, then you can actually go into the setup menu under station names and build what we call a group station. So say stations 1, 2, and 3, because of their relative size, always train together, and all the sessions are shared sessions. We can say, I'm going to create a new station here. I'm going to call it a group. And this is going to be training group 1. And in the group section, I say group station is training station 1, 2, and 3 on here. I got to change the name. We'll call this one 100. So training group 1 is now available as a station that you can assign things to, but it is also made up of anything that's assigned to station 1, 2, and 3. So what this allows me to do is I could go in and say, I would like, I think I'll have to re-log into FirePro just to reset my station list here. So say in this scenario, I could go into my personnel module. I could say, show me people who are assigned to training group 1, right? And this gives me stations, everybody who's on station 1, 2, and 3. I could add my firefighter filter at this point if I wanted to maybe cut this down to a more manageable set. But then I could go into my printed report, go to training attendance by percentage, say last year, stuff that is a practice that is assigned to training group 1. Calculate that out, sort by percentage, and I get a report, which again is going to show me. And so this report now on 100% attendance is factoring in all training sessions that are attached to station 1, station 2, or station 3, because anybody can attend. So that group station tool can be a really handy way to create larger chunks for training purposes. So when we are thinking about attendance by percentage and breaking things down by station, we almost always want to just run these reports on a per station basis. And again, if we look at this scenario where I run the generic attendance by percentage report, I can say last year, if I do calculate by station, this is going to break things down on a per station basis. What I could do on this particular report, though, is if I just wanted to run that generic report for a single station at a time, I could say, give me station 1, run that generic attendance by percentage report, but only factor in stuff that is assigned to station 1. And that's going to allow me to really quickly break this stuff out. I'll say last year, and it's going to give me a report in there. So again, we see they didn't have any of these sessions, but we do see the overall totals for each individual person. Now, when we are going in and running these reports, another important factor that we have to consider is sometimes people take time off. Like sometimes it's quite a bit of time off. So we actually have, and I think I set it up in this other station, we actually have a report in the program which is designed to tell you how many sessions somebody missed because they took time off. So when we talk about time off, if I look at an individual personnel record, in the employment tab, there is a tab called time off. And what I can do with the time off tab is I can add time off records and say, put in an arbitrary amount of time and put in a time off reason, leave of absence, for example. So once I put this in, I mean, obviously I'm not going to be adding this person to training and incidents when they are on their time off. But it's nice to be able to figure out how many sessions happened during this time off period. So that's where the report in here called sessions missed comes in. So sessions missed only looks at time off records for a person and tells you how many sessions happened during that person's time off. So I can say, run a sessions missed report for last year, say any station. I can, paid and unpaid can be handy to do here because I'd say only factor in paid sessions, for example. But I can quickly say, okay, Alyssa missed this many sessions in the time period that we selected, that were assigned to her. So I'm just going to do a quick screenshot. And so I have it available for reference. So what that's going to let me do is I can now run attendance by percentage reports for her with an understanding of how many sessions she missed during that time off period. So I could go in and say, Alyssa, I think I must have spelled her name wrong. All right, so I'm going to search for just this one person, because again, I can run attendance by percentages for an individual person. I just need to search them out and run it. And I'm going to go into my attendance by percentage report, say last year, say any station, and when I pull this up, it gives me the option to manually adjust my base 100% value. So I'm going to say yes here. And I can quickly compare my system and say, okay, well, she missed 25 of those. So there were only 19 in her base 100%, only 4. Training would be 6. And there were 199 incidents in this time period, for example. So this is actually going to tell me, based on an arbitrary set of numbers, what percentage did she come to for the ones that she was not in fact in the hall. This is also something that you can do on other types of reports, like the standard training report or the training attendance by report or incident attendance by report, where I can go in and say, I want to do an incident attendance by percentage report for last year, calculate out, but we know that 243 incidents were ones, because if we look at the setup, 243 were during the time that she took the time off. So I can just quickly say, give me, that's actually 198, I think is the total. And arbitrarily adjust what the base 100% amount is. So I can then push that out and see, on 198 incidents that occurred when she was not on leave, she attended 36 of them and was on scene for 20. So the ability to use that sessions missed report can be a really effective way to quickly say, what did someone miss during their time off? Because there are various different reasons for time off, we generally only factor in the time off types that are flagged mark out of service ones. So if someone is not marked out of service, if they put in time off, that time off won't be counted towards this report. So thing to be aware of. Now, this is the sort of thing that often varies quite a bit from station or department to department. So it can be worth having a more detailed discussion about techniques for setting up your particular setup for this. But the basic things that you always want to be considering when you're running attendance by percentage reports are, who do I want to factor in here, and which sessions do I want to factor into 100% attendance? Because there's lots of different kinds of things that you might enter in FirePro that you don't necessarily want to penalize people for not showing up for. If they didn't know or weren't supposed to be there, then probably shouldn't punish them, although you never know. So what I'm going to do is kind of throw this open for questions. If we wanted to ask some specific stuff, then I'm happy to do that. If you want to put questions in the chat, or take yourself off mute and ask questions, now is a good time. I think on the Grand Forks side, I think I answered your question regarding assistance reports, but I can re-review it for you if you'd like me to.